The moment the billionaire's daughter walked into the restaurant, every waitress suddenly found something else to do. One disappeared into the kitchen, another pretended to polish a glass that was already spotless, and a third quietly switched tables with a coworker. But there was one waitress who didn't move. She looked straight at the young woman sitting alone beneath the afternoon sunlight, studied her frightened eyes for a few seconds, and then whispered a name that no one in that expensive restaurant had heard in years. The billionaire's daughter froze. Her fork slipped from her fingers, striking the porcelain plate with a sharp sound. For the first time that day, the powerful heiress looked less like the daughter of a billionaire and more like a terrified little girl who had just heard a secret from her past come back to life. If you believe kindness can change a life and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Sometimes, one small act of kindness can reach a place inside someone that money can never touch. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon when the young woman entered the restaurant. Her name was Seraphina Vale, the only daughter of industrial giant Alaric Vale, a man whose company owned hotels, shipping businesses, and luxury properties across the country. Seraphina had grown up surrounded by wealth, but she had never felt comfortable inside it. Cameras followed her everywhere, strangers judged her clothes, and employees treated her with nervous politeness because everyone knew that one complaint from her could cost them their jobs. That afternoon, she wore a simple cream-colored dress and carried no designer handbag, no jewelry except a small silver pendant, and no security guard beside her. She had come to the restaurant because it had been her mother's favorite place before her death. Seraphina wanted to sit quietly near the window and remember the one person who had made her feel safe. Yet the moment the staff recognized her, the atmosphere changed. The restaurant manager hurried over with an artificial smile, but several waitresses immediately avoided her section. Seraphina noticed. She had noticed it her entire life. People either wanted something from her or were afraid of her. What hurt most was that nobody seemed willing to simply treat her like an ordinary human being. She sat alone at a corner table while sunlight spilled across the white tablecloth, and for several minutes nobody approached. Her eyes lowered to the empty plate in front of her, and she tried to swallow the familiar feeling of being unwanted. Then a waitress named Mireya walked toward her. Mireya was 32, worked double shifts to support her younger brother, and had learned long ago that wealthy customers rarely noticed people like her unless something went wrong. She had been working at the restaurant for only 3 weeks, but unlike the others, she didn't know Seraphina's reputation. She didn't know the size of the Vale fortune or the influence behind the family name. All she knew was that a young woman was sitting alone, looking as though she might cry. Mireya placed a glass of water on the table and noticed the silver pendant around Seraphina's neck. Something about it made her stop. It was an old little pendant shaped like a crescent moon, scratched along one edge. Mireya had seen it before, many years earlier, when she was only a teenager working evenings at a small neighborhood shelter with her grandmother. Her grandmother had been a volunteer there, caring for abandoned children and struggling families. One rainy afternoon, a frightened little girl had arrived at the shelter holding that exact pendant. The girl's name had not been Seraphina Vale. Her name had been Nora Bellamy. Mireya remembered the child because she had spent weeks helping her. Nora had been about 6 years old, terrified of loud voices, and convinced that someone would come back for her. She used to hide beneath a wooden table whenever strangers entered the room. Mireya's grandmother had told her that the little girl's mother had died and that her father had disappeared from her life. One morning, however, a powerful-looking man arrived with lawyers and security guards. He claimed the child was his daughter and took her away before anyone could ask questions. Mireya had never forgotten those frightened eyes. Now, standing beside Seraphina's table, she looked at the woman again. The elegant dress, expensive restaurant, and polished appearance could not hide what Mireya suddenly recognized. It was the same small crescent pendant. The same tiny scar above the left eyebrow. The same habit of rubbing her thumb against her fingers whenever she was afraid. Mireya leaned closer and quietly said the secret name she had heard only once from that little girl years ago. Nora. Seraphina's entire body went still. She stared at Mireya as if the restaurant had disappeared around them. Then her lips trembled. Nobody had called her Nora since she was 6. Her father had told her that the name belonged to a life she should forget. Whenever she asked about the years before joining the Vale family, he became angry and told her that the past was dangerous. Over time, Seraphina had convinced herself that perhaps she had imagined those memories. But Mireya knew. And that frightened her more than anything. Seraphina asked how Mireya knew the name, and the story that followed broke something open inside her. Mireya told her about the shelter, her grandmother, the little girl who used to sleep clutching a worn blanket, and the afternoon a man arrived to take her away. She admitted that she had often wondered what happened to that child. She had never known she had become one of the wealthiest young women in the country. Seraphina began to cry. She finally understood why certain smells, songs, and rainy afternoons had always made her heart ache without explanation. The memories weren't dreams. They were fragments of a life someone had deliberately buried. But there was one more secret. Mireya's grandmother had kept an old notebook containing the names and stories of every child she had helped. Inside was a photograph of little Nora sitting beside a woman who looked remarkably like Seraphina's mother. On the back was a handwritten sentence explaining that the child's mother had feared for her daughter's safety and had arranged for her to be taken away temporarily after discovering that powerful people were threatening the family. Seraphina stared at the photograph for a long time. Her mother had never abandoned her. She had been trying to protect her. That discovery changed everything. Instead of confronting her father with anger, Seraphina returned home with the photograph and began quietly investigating her family's history. She discovered financial records, old legal documents, and evidence that her mother had planned to expose corruption inside the family business before her sudden death. The truth was painful, but it gave Seraphina something she had never possessed before, a choice. Weeks later, Seraphina returned to the restaurant. This time, she did not come as a billionaire's daughter. She came carrying a small box of old photographs and a handwritten letter from Mireya's grandmother, who had passed away years earlier. She sat at the same table where she had cried that afternoon and asked Mireya to join her. Seraphina eventually used part of her inheritance to establish a foundation for abandoned and displaced children, naming it after the woman who had protected her mother and cared for her when she was little. She also made Mireya the first director of the foundation's community outreach program. The waitress who once struggled to pay her rent suddenly found herself helping thousands of children find safe homes, education, and families. But the greatest change happened inside Seraphina. She stopped being ashamed of the little girl she used to be. She stopped believing that vulnerability made her weak. And she finally understood that the person who saved her life wasn't the billionaire who gave her everything money could buy. It was the ordinary woman who remembered her when the whole world had forgotten. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. And before you leave, comment this special line: kindness remembers what the world forgets. Because sometimes, the person who changes your life isn't the richest person in the room. Sometimes, it's the one who sees your pain, remembers your name, and chooses to care when everyone else chooses to walk away. And that afternoon, beneath the warm sunlight of an ordinary restaurant, a waitress didn't just recognize a billionaire's daughter. She recognized the little girl who had been waiting years to be remembered.